Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Today we are delighted to have with us a guest speaker, Mr. Amando Suriñach from our client company, Esteve, Spain, who will be talking to us about CMO process scale-up in the pharma industry. Amando Suriñach from Barcelona graduated in both chemical engineering and chemistry and received a master's in fine chemistry as part of an Esteve internship, and he's currently finishing up his industrial PhD on the application of scale-up methodologies in a pharmaceutical company. In 2017, he joined Esteve, and after 2 years of working on R&D, process development, and scale-up activities, he specialized in process engineering. Today, in his role as a process engineer, he supports the R&D process development teams and production plants to ensure API projects and their successful scale-up to manufacturing scales. During this session, please feel free to ask any question in the chat, and we'll do our best to either address them during the session or we will email our answers back to you afterwards. We hope that you enjoy today's very special webinar, and we thank you very, very much for attending. Amando, the microphone is yours.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So first of all, thank you for this kind introduction, and also to all the Vismix team for inviting me to this session. Well, the agenda will follow today is this one. I will start talking about the Esteve company. Wait a minute, I will start talking about the Esteve company to then give you some details of scale-up theory, but focusing more in mixing theory. To then present the scale-up methodology that we follow in Esteve, and some case studies to finish this session. So Esteve company was founded in 1929, and it's an international company based in Barcelona. And it has two main groups, which is Esteve Pharma and Esteve CMO. And I'm involved in the CMO sector, so today we'll talk about this sector, which is focused on the production of active pharmaceutical ingredients. So we support our customers from initial stage of development until the final commercial production. And we have different capabilities and services, but today we'll focus on process engineering. We have the headquarters located in Barcelona and also the R&D facilities. And then we have five production plants around the world, 3 on Catalonia, Spain, 1 in Mexico, and the other in China. With a total number of reactors around 250, which gives us a total reaction volume around 1,000 cubic meters. They are distributed in the 5 plants. And having this picture, I moved to the scale-up theory, but having the same picture of the reaction volume and the number of reactors, because as a CMO, we require multipurpose plants in order to fit all these different projects that we have at the same time, and each project may be in a different stage in terms of quantities, but also in different stages of the clinical and chemical development, different chemical requirements in terms of the reactor specifications. And this leads to a very difficult plan schedule. And the big problem here is that this plan schedule is being constantly updated due to projects and expected events. And one delay of one project usually impacts to other project schedule. So here, it's very important to reduce this risk of unexpected events. Some of them cannot be avoidable, such as a delay on the raw material supply or a customer decision, but there's a window of opportunity when we talk about the scale-up. So if we ensure that our process have a right first-time scale-up from lab to plant, but also tech transfer between plants, we would avoid these process delays and also reduce the risk of a scale-up failure in terms of cost and time. And also, if we could ensure that our process can be fit in as much reactors as possible, we would have more flexible processes that could be fit in different reactors and be more flexible against these project unexpected events that changes our schedule. As a CMO inside the pharma industry, obviously we are focused on quality as a process result, but also on yield and process cycle time. And to achieve these process results, we have to be aware about scale-independent factors and scale-dependent factors. The first one, we usually deal with projects that have been developed for several years in terms of chemistry. So here the kinetics, the compound properties, the different equilibriums have been well studied. And on the other hand, we have the scale-dependent factors, which are relating to mixing and heat transfer as the main parameters. But others, such as filtration and drying, are also important because the equipment that we use at industrial scale is very different respect the laboratory scale. So when we deal with these projects in a CMO, the scale independent factor, as said, we usually have a lot of previous development, so we have a lot of information, and yes, we adjust the process, but we usually do few chemical changes in order to adapt the process to the plant or to increase yield. But in terms of scale-dependent factors, we have less information about possible antecedents in terms of industrial batches, and also low information about the scale-up factors. So this gives the picture that in a CMO business, when dealing with chemical developed processes, the process results may depend rather in scale-dependent factors than independent factors. I'm not saying that the scale-independent factors are not important, because we have to be aware that they are the driving force of all our process results, but usually we have less information about these scale-dependent factors. So how can we study these scale-dependent factors? First of all, we should think about our plant vessels and have the calculations of our plant reactor, and then perform our laboratory trials in R&D inside these plant reactor ranges. This is the commonly said the scale down strategy, which I would be focused later on. And this is usually applied to mixing operations involving heterogeneous phases or heat transfer when dealing with high exothermic reactions. In the session that we'll focus today in mixing, so now I start the mixing theory part. So this is the typical scheme of a reactor. I want you to focus about the baffles and the impeller, which are the most important geometrical parts in terms of mixing. And I want you to ask yourself, what is a good mixing for you? Because many times we hear about some reaction requires good mixing or some crystallization. And well, could be to reach a turbulent regime, a fast compound homogenization as high as possible. And here the point is that there's no a general and good answer for this question, because a good mixing is impossible to be defined without the proper context. And as a tail example, imagine that you are trying to dissolve some sugar in water using a spoon, and this would be a good system, a good mixing system to dissolve the sugar. But if you try to do mashed potatoes with the same spoon, you would probably not achieve the targeted results. So it's very important to know the purpose. And here I mentioned one of the multiple mixing definitions that there are in the literature. But here I like this because it's the mechanical energy that induces fluid motion in a volume in order to reduce homogeneities, but it's to achieve the desired process result. And this is very important. So this mechanical energy that we are inducing, where does it go? It could go to flow or to shear. And two more examples here is that for high flow impellers, we could imagine this propeller of a motorboat. That here, what do you want is to generate as much flow as possible in order to induce the boat motion. But in the other hand, in a kitchen blender, what do you want is to cut the fruit or the food that you have inside. So you require high shear, and you don't really want to have a very good flow. So in our industry, the same happens with our impellers. So there are high shear impellers and low shear impellers. High shear impellers are more suitable, for example, for hydrogenations when you want to split the hydrogen bubbles into smaller bubbles in order to increase the mass transfer between gas phase and liquid phase. And there, for example, for low shear impellers are very suitable for crystallizations when do you want to perform crystal damage, which could reduce your final particle size. On the other hand, we also have to think that power is not linear. And this is a typical formula for calculation the power, and we have the power number, which is the geometrical factor, which depends on reactor and impeller geometry. Then we have the density of the mixture, we have the steering speed at the cube, and we have the impeller diameter at the fifth power. So it means that if you double the steering speed, you are really introducing 10 times more power into the system. And if you double the impeller diameter, you are introducing 30 times more power. This is not obvious when we talk about the steering speed, but in fact, it's the only variable that we have. The problem is that we have to think that it's not linear through impellers and scales. The other variable that we could modify is the geometry, but in our plans, these multi-purpose plans, it's very difficult to change the geometry. So I would say that we only have this parameter. In terms of mixing outcomes, we can think in many different mixing outcomes. There are multiple mixing parameters to be calculated. And you can imagine that it's impossible to hold all them constant if you only have the steering speed as a variable. So it's required to identify the key mixing parameter and hold it constant. It's important to mention that the key parameter is the most influencing process parameter, but it's probably not the only one. So you have to be aware of the, I would say, non-key mixing parameters also. To perform these calculations, you could find different commercial packages. Here we use BusyMix turbulence software, which allows us to compare different geometries and reactors. And once we identify this key mixing parameter, we hold it constant through scales. However, scale up is not an exact science, and I want you to aware that if you could maintain the similar geometry between the reactors that you are comparing, usually between lab and plant, you would reduce the scale-up errors. And that's why, because if we have different geometry, if we hold only one parameter constant, the other ones would be much more different if we do not hold this geometry. Also, softwares may perform different approaches based on geometry, so you may be calling different formulas depending on the geometry with different errors. And finally, the flow pattern is strongly dependent on the geometry. As an example, imagine a crystallization where do you want to avoid uncontrolled nucleation, do you want to avoid crystal damage, and you focus on the key mixing parameter as the tip speed, the velocity of the plate in the tip of the impeller. And yeah, here we have two systems with the same tip speed. It's the same vessel, it's the same impeller, and the same steering speed. The only difference is the presence of baffles. Here in the right hand, we have 4 flat baffles. In the left hand, we have baffled system. And you can see that the solid phase, which is these red particles, are not properly suspended in the left picture. So probably the crystallization outcomes would be different despite you are holding this tip speed constant. So now I will focus on the Esteve scale-up methodology. First, I will talk about the scale-down strategy, which is a common strategy applied in our industry, and it's focused on our targeted plant reactor. And what we have to do is to translate the stirring speed range of this reactor into a key mixing parameter range. So having this, we would have parameters that are scale independent and can be comparable between scales. So we could go to laboratory scale and perform these scale down trials, mimicking the key mixing parameter of the plant. And if possible, I recommend to have similar reactor geometry also. So once you do this trial at laboratory scale, if you have the expected outcomes, then the process could be scaled up. If not, you should explore other mixing ranges inside the same reactor, change the reactor, modify chemistry, or even accept that the process outcomes will be slightly different. Here is important because once you find that mixing is critical, it's a very good practice to ensure operational ranges in terms of batch size and stirring speed. So you should limitate the batch size, which is related to the filling volume, and the stirring speed in order to ensure that your process outcomes in this mixing space would be robust. This process usually implies many mixing calculations for each unit operation and for each possible plant reactor. And here we use the target reactors, but we also include reactor equivalents in order to be more flexible. We perform 5 to 10 mixing calculations for each reactor, and the same for the scale down trials in order to screen stirring speed, but also reactor geometry. So if each project has multiple steps and each step has multiple unit operations, you can imagine that you can deal with a high number of calculations. So you require a tool to perform mixing calculations that would be fast to resolve this number of calculations. And as said, we use VisiMix, but why we use VisiMix? And to explain that, I will firstly explain the typical approach, the historical approach, which is the literature empirical correlations, where in the literature you can find some equations that try to model or to regress some experimental data to a formula or equation. And the main problem of this approach is that the experimental data that is available in the literature is usually for standard configurations and in the typical filling volume, which is around 75%. So we have limitation in geometries, but the good point is that the calculations are very fast and is easy to handle when you have commercial package that they integrate all these literature data. On the other hand, we have CFD model, computational fluid dynamics, and these are high fidelity models of any reactor geometry. The drawbacks here is that the calculations are longer, so are 6 hours, but it depends on the calculation that you are doing, also on the machine, and it probably requires some expertise on the field. So for our CMO daily work, I would say that it's not suitable, but it's very useful for specific cases. So here there was a gap, and I think that VisiMix solver, at least for us, has a very smart solution, which is a hybrid solution between CFD and empirical data. So they had generate a lot of experimental data based on different vessels, different types of baffles, different impellers, and they also perform numerical calculations in order to solve some momentum balance equations, which is the fundamentals of mixing. So they had integrated both scenarios in mathematical modeling to perform instant calculations, which is very interesting. And in our case, they cover many of our configurations, and we can calculate at all the operable filling volume. To finish with this scale-up methodology, the third point is to focus on geometrical similarity. And here we have some examples of our plant vessels. We can see the baffles, which are also different between vessels, different kinds of impellers. And one of the big challenge was that at laboratory scale, we do not usually have baffles, and neither we have these kind of different impellers. So we propose to generate a self-designed R&D equipment to mimic our plant vessels. I'm talking about both impellers and baffles. And for kilolab scale, we perform this set of impellers and this kind of flat baffles. And at a smaller scale, we reduce the number of impellers to high shear impellers and medium shear impellers, but with the presence of baffles. So to summarize this strategy, we have a systematic methodology, which is the scale down strategy. We have an appropriate tool for our facilities, which is the Visimic software, and we have an appropriate R&D equipment in order to ensure the geometrical similarity that would reduce the scale-up errors. Now we enter to the last part of this session, and I will present you 3 case studies, one related to liquid extraction, another for solid liquid reaction, and to finish reactive crystallization. Those are the key mixing parameters that I will focus on. And well, it's important to mention here that you can see that it's all related to energy dissipation or shear rate. And obviously we have also, when dealing with two immiscible liquids, they just disperse the speed in order to have good dispersion. And when dealing with solids, they just suspended the speed in order to avoid solids settling in the bottom of the reactor. But why we focus on these ones and not all the other mixing parameters? Because my experience led me to think that the simpler the better, and at the end, energy dissipation and shear rate are like the raw mixing parameters that then propagate mixing to other mixing parameters that can be calculated. So I usually focus on that in different parts of the vessel. We start with this liquid extraction, which was an already validated process for our customer. So it was a tech transfer, and the customer reported that citric acid extraction can have the capacity to emulsify. So after a reaction, this organic phase, the reaction mixture was mixed with aqueous citric acid in order to purge some impurities of the process. And well, if you overmix these both phases, they can emulsify. Our targeted reactors were those ones, and the steering speed range was between 30 and 100 RPM. So here the mixing target was to ensure dispersion in order to allow this impurity purge, but avoid too much mixing that could emulsify phases. When dealing with ensure dispersion, what we usually have is to calculate the minimum average energy dissipation or power per unit mass in order to disperse. And to do so, we usually have empirical correlations to calculate this minimum speed, but then we check it experimentally. So here you have an example where you are rising the steering speed and you are able to disperse phases. And in terms of emulsification, here we have two pictures in order to exemplify where I'm referring to an emulsion. Here, the same system is very clear, very clear phases and neat separation. However, in the right hand, we have that the aqueous bottom phase is emulsified because there are small drops of organic layer here. So you can imagine that if the product is in the organic layer, if you go downstream with this process and you discard all this aqueous bottom layer, you would have a yield detrimental because there's a lot of organic phase. And I focus on maximum energy dissipation because at the end is related to the drop size. So maximum energy dissipation is found near the impeller blade. So here the drops of the dispersed phase are split into smaller and smaller drops. So if you can generate too much small drops is then when you have the risk of emulsion. Going back to the case study, what we first did is the plant calculation. So both reactors, steering speed range was translated to both key mixing parameters. And the just dispersed by empirical correlation was found to be 0.05. So we should limit our first reactor to 35 RPMs. And in the case of the upper part of the range, obviously we could go to these 100 RPMs, but as we knew that this system could emulsify, we prefer to limit it for 75 RPMs. And having this range, we have to focus which is the maximum value of this maximum energy dissipation. And it was this 54 watts per kilo, which should be scaled down. So to design this scale down, first of all, was to ensure the geometrical similarity, and we performed the scale down trials in 1 liter reactor provided with 3 flat baffles and anchor impeller. And we calculated that 350 RPMs would be equivalent, more or less, of the maximum value of energy dissipation. And on the other hand, we also proposed a low steering speed trial that would be in the experimental dispersed speed, which, based on correlation, should be around 100 RPMs. We started with this low mixing trial, and we proved that 100 RPMs were enough to disperse phases. And once we stop agitation, we see a clear separation. Here you can see that this phase is not clear, but it was reported like that, so it was the expected outcome. What we want to see is this upper clear phase. And once we perform the high steering speed trial, we show the report motion. So after stopping agitation, what we could observe is that we require 3 hours until we achieve this clear separation. Both trials were go ahead with the downstream processes and isolated. So we obtain the final IPI, and we corroborate that they have the same IPI quality and yield. So at the end, it was only a matter of time, and between 1 and 3 hours, we do not think that it's critical. So we take advantage of these scale down trials to limit mixing in order to disperse phases, but have an acceptable emulsion. We translate this data in the targeted reactors, proposing the steering speed ranges, and we finally validate this process at the first reactor in the targeted steering speed without observing emulsions. The second case study is a solid liquid reaction. The solid phase is this aluminum chloride, where it was transferred with this pre-mixing stage, where the aluminum chloride is mixing with the solvent during 3 hours in order to reduce the particle size, because this aluminum chloride was granulated with a big particle size. And after this pre-mixing stage, we charge both reagents, and after 2 hours, the reaction was expected to be complete. Problem here is that this was developed using magnetic stirring, and once we check mechanical stirring, the reaction time rise from these 2 hours until 15 hours or even more, depending on the geometry. So here the point was that the particle breakage, when you use magnetic stirring, is very effective because there's a constant friction between the stirring bar and the bottom of the reactor. So you are doing like a milling effect here. But once you move to a stirred vessel, the impeller shear rate is the main cause of the particle breakage, but it's not usually as effective as the direct friction. So the key mixing parameter here was very clear, which was the maximum shear rate. So the first point was to perform mixing calculations in order to figure out what was the mixing at the targeted plant reactor, but also in this reactor that lasts more than expected. We find that the shear rate at plant scale would be much higher than laboratory scale. So if we should scale up this, we would target this higher part of the range. So we should scale down similar shear rate to lab scale in order to prove what happens with this reaction time. The system that we proposed were a 1 liter reactor provided with high shear impeller and flat baffles. And we calculated that if we mix at 550 RPMs or 700, we would be targeting this higher part of the range. And We performed these experiments, achieving 2 hours of reaction time. So from these experiments, we could extract that if we ensure a maximum shear rate above 11,000, we would probably achieve these 2 hours of reaction time. Here, the validation batch size range that we were targeting was this one. So we should check that in the whole validation range, we have this 11,000, and it was checked, and we have been performing this process multiple times, and we have screened all these batch sizes, achieving the desired reaction time, which was these 2 hours. Finally, the third case study is a reactive crystallization. In this case, is a validated process also, but it's a tech transfer between 2 of our plants, the EHP plant in China and the Solra plant. And well, the process is that the free base API is transformed with the salt by sodium hydroxide addition with a controlled feed rate, and the PSD was targeting a D90 of 60-90 microns. It was reported that the average energy distribution during this addition was directly related to the final particle size. And well, this was the scale of the already validated reactor, which was steered at low steering speed because previous scale down trials proven that if we introduce too much energy in the system, we could reduce too much our D90 target. So here the point was to reproduce this process in the Solra plant reactor, which has a steering speed between 20 and 50 RPMs. So as a mixing target, we have to ensure this ensure suspension, but avoid uncontrolled nucleation that could reduce the particle size, but also crystal damage that also could reduce the particle size due to attrition. First calculations about the proven steering speed range in EHP reactor were calculated in order to perform these both key mixing parameters. And then once we check all the validation batch size range and in the lowest steering speed available in our targeted reactor, we figure out that we should mix at the lowest part of the range, these 20 RPMs, in order to be equivalent to the 0.06 batch per kilogram. But we also be aware that we have some points that were above the proven values. So we should perform some scale down trials in order to prove that these 0.22 batch per kilo were not reducing too much the PSD, and that this shear rate up to 3000 would not perform crystal damage. That was the targeted reactor. So we scaled down the geometry to similar impeller and flap baffles. And we performed 2 experiments, one into the target, which was the lowest steering speed, and the other given to these 30 RPMs of the targeted reactor, which were achieving both key mixing parameters. And we monitor the D90 in different parts of the process. So after the sodium hydroxide addition, we checked that, as expected, we reduced PSD due to this higher energy input, but it was inside the specification that we were targeting. And after the cooling RAM and the aging time prior to filtrate, we could not see significant particle size reduction. So we could say that no crystallization was happening below this 3000 of shear rate, and that the D90 was okay in this power per unit mass. So we scaled up this process and we proposed that for the whole batch size range, we should target the lowest part of the range, 20 RPMs, but with a certain margin of steering speed. To finish this talk, I would like to highlight some points. And first of all, that the scale-up factors must be evaluated to ensure this right first-time scale-up from lab to plant, but also between plant. And good mixing is meaningless without a process context. That there are multiple mixing parameters to be calculated, but only a few variables or only one, which is stirring speed. So we should focus on the key mixing parameters, but without missing that non-key mixing parameters can have also some effect on the process. That this mix software is a powerful tool to accelerate mixing calculations, but using a fundamental approach. And finally, that if we ensure this geometrical similarity during the scale down trials, we would reduce these scale up errors. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, it will be a pleasure to answer it.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting to see all the explanations from the very starting point and structured well. From the explanation about what is your mission in the company and how it's connected to the fundamentals of technology and knowledge about the phenomena of mixing, and after that how to apply in different kinds of examples. I enjoy a lot. We have some questions, so I will open the question and read. It's from Cliff Cowell. Thank you very much to be with us. He presented some time ago his presentation. Thank you to be in our forum again, Cliff. And the question is, can you comment on how you took heat transfer into account? I often use the tangential wall velocity from Visimix.
Yeah, here, depending on the criticality of the heat transfer. So if it's very critical, I usually rely more in experimental data. So I perform cooling ramps at different filling volume of the reactor, because this would be the most accurate data that you could generate. But if not, you could use Visimix or other softwares. The problem that I experienced is that if you are dealing with old reactors, this simulated data could be not as accurate as expected. But liquid velocity, so mixing impact on heat transfer, if you ensure a high mixing degree, I would say that other parts of the heat transfer resistance would have more impact.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any other question in the panel? Yes. We have another question. It's from Carolina Lopez. How we can mitigate foam formation when we have suspension solid plus liquid? Can we use Visimix to tackle this? So you have any experience with foaming?
Yeah, we face one crystallization that foams have been generated, and the point here, the key mixing parameter is the same than when dealing with emulsions, because at the end, foam is gas insertion in the presence of a small solid particle. So I would focus on maximum energy dissipation. So Visimix, I think that it would be a good tool to resolve this problem.
Yes. And I can add that if you have enough data about the solvent that you are using and the surface tension between the heat space and the media that you are mixing, you can use gas calculations, gas liquid calculations, and there you can have an estimation about the gas entering to the media, so the velocity, superficial velocity in the heat space, and it will give you a very good connection between what you see and what was the condition to generate it. Okay, it's possible to do, and this is a typical application in some of the companies where now, and it's now more frequent when we have upstream and downstream when we have biotechnology, that you have some bio microorganism that can generate some foaming in the tank. It's known and it's possible to calculate. Do you have any other question? Thank you, Carolina, for your question. Do you have any other question in the panel? Yes. So I have a question. If you see during your presentation, you explain well about main mixing parameters that are pure mixing parameters, because normally when you work with your colleagues, not everyone is aware about the pure mixing parameters, energy dissipation, turbulent shear rate. Sometimes this is not so clear. So how you connect, how you communicate with your colleagues when you need to use pure hydrodynamic parameters that normally are not so well known or non-intuitive for your colleagues. So how you communicate it?
Well, usually I used to check literature in order to figure out which is the best mixing parameter. But well, I don't know if I catch the question properly, but depending on each process, you would focus on one or other mixing parameter, and I would say that it's so. For example, for a liquid emulsion, a liquid extraction that can emulsify, obviously you can focus on maximum energy dissipation, but it would be also okay if you focus on drop size, because at the end we are looking for the same. So I don't know if it's a better way to manage that. For me, it's better to do it simpler, but
Okay.
I don't know.
The point is because I see that you use pure parameters, that is okay. This is the function, this mixing. But normally when you go to explain what you did, the people that are working with you are not so aware about mixing parameters. They are aware more about the purity of the material by the end, the yield, the operation, like foaming, okay? And this connection is normally difficult to explain, even when you are expert of mixing or you are trying to solve with mixing results, it is difficult. And my question is what, it's okay, it's coming from the place that we need to explain more, and the way to do it, you do it very well, is to connect this pure hydrodynamic parameters, shear rate, with some measurement, with some results that are clear for everyone. So everyone will understand purity, particle size, okay? So this connection is very important. Normally it's what happens when we try to explain mixing and try to guide our customers. The main key point is to connect between something that seems to be abstract than mixing parameter and the real results. But you did very well, because not only the real results, you explain why. You explain that you need your facility and it should be free for other projects. So this was a very key point to understand the powerful of the knowledge of this field. I have another question here from Mark Asagra. Very nice talk. Congrats. You have mainly talk about steering blades, shape, and stuff. Will, for example, the reactor or vessel shape also affect? Do they usually have the same shape? And if that is the case, why?
Yeah, so thank you, Mark. Here, the point is that the vessels, in terms of the vessel itself, without considering baffles, are usually very similar. So there are, well, in our case, in Esteve, all of them are similar. In other industries or other pharma companies, they could have also conical bottoms, which are also very useful for decantations, for example. But this can be modeled also with Vismix. And the key point for me is the presence of baffles and the type of baffles. This is the key point in terms of mixing, or how the vessel affects the mixing behavior.
Very good. Yes, the shape. If you have a elliptical bottom or conic or a semicircular bottom, normally the deviation is not important. It's less than 2%. It's not important. But if you have flat bottom or conical bottom, that are completely different geometries, there the result will be different. Okay, so not always the conical, elliptical, or cylindric, or circular will be different, but completely different geometries, yes, they have an influence, and the energy should be different, and we need to take care of it. Okay. Good. Thank you very much. Do you have any other question in the panel? Very good. So thank you very much, Amado, for this very good presentation. We really enjoy. You cover all, and the connection from the high level of the business to the deep study about the single number, about the shear rate, and something that explain how it's connected the technology and the science with the business. It is really good. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. If you have any other question, please free to contact us. We will transfer the question to Amado, and we invite you to continue to be in the forum. We will release in few days or weeks a new software that's relating to kinetics and chemical reactions, the connection between them, and how to solve. It is a really news for everyone, and I hope to see you again in this kind of meetings. If every one of you, if some one of you want to present your own experience on the use of the software, you are open here to see. The forum is a forum that we like to hear from you, and we get more ideas. So come back and come to us and ask to present. It is a good experience, and as you can see, the good level of presentation we are providing to you. This presentation and the video, we will edit it, and we will upload in the website. So, and you will get an email from it, so you will get all the information. You can hear again and study more about mixing. So thank you very much for all. Yes, we will send Peter Ponce will send the presentation to everyone. Thank you very much for your time, and we will see you more. Thank you, Amado, for your nice and very good presentation. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Moshe. Bye.